If you were looking to purchase your first e-bike, or maybe you're upgrading your current e-bike, you're probably faced with a similar dilemma that we've all faced, and that is, what type of e-bike do I need to get? After all, there's lots of different uses for e-bikes and styles of e-bikes, but people don't want to buy multiple e-bikes for everything they're doing. They generally want one good e-bike that's just a good all-around one. Well, meet the new Ride1UP Vorsa. It's Ride1UP's newest released bike coming out this week, and it's got quite a few features that take it from being the average e-bike you're looking at to doing some really cool things, giving this bike what we call an SUV style DNA, or a SUV style bike. Simply meaning, just like the SUV vehicle, it can do a little bit of everything really well while not needing to be any one specific type of other vehicle. So let's take a look at all the new party tricks on the Ride1UP Vorsa, and we'll show you how this new ride might earn a spot in your garage. All right, guys, so the new Ride1UP Vorsa is a Class 3 e-bike. Now, it ships as a Class 2, but you can easily switch that to Class 3 mode, giving you those 20-mile-an-hour speeds or up to 28 miles an hour. But they also included an off-road mode, because this bike is also meant to have the ability to be kind of a do-anything bike. And the off-road mode is going to remove those speed restrictions beyond 28 miles an hour. And that's for use in areas where obviously it's legally allowed, but having that option, maybe you're out camping or exploring on some public lands or private lands, that is a really cool feature to have in this bike. Now, in terms of price, this is priced at $1595, and in today's tariff-heavy market, that's a really aggressive pricing strategy, and I think you'll see as we go through here, the value really starts to shine through. So this is UL 20849 certified, and the battery itself is UL 2271 certified. Now, they say this comes in at 70 pounds. I put this up on the scale, and it was right at 71.3, so very close to their estimation. I took the battery out, and that went down to about 64.5 pounds. And so the battery itself is right at 8.9 pounds. In terms of frame configurations, this is the ST frame, giving us that nice low step-through frame style, but there's also an XR version that has a high bar that is a more traditional looking style if you want that one instead. Now, the ST frame fits riders from 5'2" up to 5'11", and I'm 5'11", and it's not every day that I test a bike where my height is right on the tip of the scale of that range. And so being able to test it at the very tip of the scale was really nice, and I was happy to report at 5'11", fitting a 5'11", it fit really, really well. I never felt like I was oversized for the bike never felt too small underneath me, and I had plenty of room in the seat post and with the adjustable stem up top to make it fit just the way I wanted. Now, in terms of colors, there is 4 or 5 colors. This one they have not released the name of. I call it sandstone. It's kind of an off-white, earthy off-white color, but there's also a glacier blue. There's also a matcha green color and a slate gray, kind of a dark gray color. So 4 different color options to pick from, everything from earthy colors to blue and bright colors. You can kind of pick what you want there. Now, when it comes to some geo numbers for this ST frame, we have a wheelbase from front hub to rear hub of about 44 inches or 43.6. We have a 15-inch reach up top, but because we have an adjustable stem and we can move that handlebar back and forth, that reach will kind of vary depending on how you align it for your height and your comfort level. Now, the seat itself can be extended from roughly 27 inches off the ground up to 39, and we have an 18.6-inch standover height. Now, if you see this little extra bit of space here, generally on a step-through frame, we see a step-over or step-through height of about 16 to 17 inches. This one's 18.6, which is a tad higher than we're used to seeing, but that's for good reason. This little extra bit of frame material they added here, they call it a gusset. What it's actually doing is this additional metal or additional aluminum here is stiffening up the frame and giving it a more responsive and less flexy feel. Generally, the biggest challenge with any step-through frame is just eliminating that side-to-side flex because you have no top crossbar. And this extra piece of metal here actually went a long way in stiffening up the frame, and it doesn't have any flex or wiggle that made me ever feel uncomfortable or even notice it during the ride. So kudos and well done there with that addition. Now, another cool factor about the Vorsa, this is a 440-pound max payload, which is a really aggressive, high-volume payload for a bike like this. And there's a couple of extra cool tricks we'll get into later about how that plays out. Now, when it comes to the wheels and tires, we've got a 27.5-inch alloy wheel, and it's wrapped in a 27.5 by 2.6-inch Schwalbe Smart Sam tire. Now these tires are a really nice kind of all-terrain yet still everyday practical tire. They have some nice supple feel to them. They're pretty soft compound. They roll really quietly and smooth. And I think you'll see when we get to the range section that they even played a part in pushing out our range numbers. Now in terms of fenders, we have both front and back fenders. These are a metal fender and they are powder coated black to kind of match the accents of this bike. Now, personally, you guys know at this channel, I'm more of a fan of plastic fenders because they're not gonna rattle, they're not gonna rust, and they generally don't bend. And if they do, they usually will flex back. With that said, these don't have any rattles to them, and all in all, they performed really well on the rides. Now, when it comes to racks, we have a standard rear rack here that holds up to 150 pounds, so a pretty substantial payload on this rear rack. And previously, Ride1UP had welded racks onto the bike, and I'm happy to say this time around they are bolted on, so if you don't want the rack, you can certainly remove it from use. But there's also another really cool feature about this rack, and that's where the versatility aspect comes in to the Vorsa here. They've given you a rack extension. Now, this extension goes onto the back of the bike. It comes with additional hardware, and it allows you to mount and extend this rack all the way out, meaning lots of cargo gear, lots of space for that cargo and gear, to include kids and passengers, because they even sell accessories that include things like passenger or child seating on the back rack. So really versatile thing to have on the back of the bike. And one of the best parts about it is you can have no rack at all. You can leave the standard rack in place, or you can go with the extended rack that is included at no extra charge and really space out the versatility of your bike and just ride it around and use it the way you want to. Now, in terms of lighting, we've got front headlight rated at 100 lux. It's nice and bright, and it's adjustable in its angle. And then on the back, built in to the rear fender, we have a tail light that also acts as a brake light. So when it comes to the powertrain on the new Vorsa, that's another strong point here. We've got a 750 watt rear hub motor. It's made by AKM, and it is a torque sensor. Now, nominally rated is 750 watts, meaning that is the baseline wattage, but it has the ability to peak far beyond that. Now, Ride1UP has not disclosed, or at least told me, at what level it peaks up to, but because of the new display with all the data it has on it, I'm able to see real-time live power wattage output while I'm riding. And when I'm from roughly a dead stop to a full bore, all out pedaling, looking for max speeds, I saw it peak at up to 1420 watts. So I know at a minimum, we have a peaking wattage of 1420 watts. Now, torque here is 95 Newton meters, and on the ride, as you'll see here in just a second, it handles climbs really, really well. I think this bike is gonna do really good in hilly areas, or if you're in a flat area, it's just gonna have tons of power and speed whenever you want it. Now, some really cool things going on with this powertrain. So the first thing is when it comes to sensors, usually they say you need to get a bike with a cadence sensor, or you got to get a bike with a torque sensor. This bike came with both, and they allow you to switch between both in the display with some really easy to use menus. Now, by doing that, that gives you the ability to see how you like the feeling of a cadence sensor when you ride. After you get used to that, you can switch back to a torque sensor, see how that rides, and you can kind of pick each day when you go out, or you can just leave it in one that you like better and never touch it again. Having that flexibility and versatility is just going to help you as the owner just have more of a bike that you like. Now, the torque sensor on this, now Ride1UP in general terms has always done a really good job with torque sensors, and the Vorsa is no exception to that. This torque sensor feels very refined, very smooth, and then pedal assist is very natural feeling. Now, in terms of the battery, we have a 48 volt battery, 15 amp hours, giving us 720 watt hours, and it's fully enclosed in this down tube. Now, if you want to take it off for off the bike charging or for security purposes, it does come with a set of keys, and I'll show you how to do that. So here you'll just take your key, you'll insert it on the non-drive side, do a 180-degree flip, and the battery will drop partially out, and you'll depress this safety latch, and that will allow it to not fall out on its own and allow you to pull it out. So like I said, this is UL 2271 certified. Now, this battery and the whole bike from Ride1UP has a 1-year warranty. And in terms of range, they say this combo is going to get anywhere between 30 and 60 miles on a single charge. Now, I gave that a test here locally, and when I gave the test, I gave it pretty ideal conditions. So I gave it a flat course. I was on a paved path where I didn't have to stop and start often at all, which really does a heavier drain on the battery. and I'm 180 pounds and I had good tire PSI, around 40 PSI when I did it. Now with that said, all those ideal conditions, on maximum PAS, so pushing that 20-mile-an-hour max, which is the local law speed limit on our paths, I was able to get 45 miles. Now bumping that to minimum PAS, averaging about 12 miles an hour, there I saw 80 miles in a single charge, far surpassing their 60-mile estimate. Now you might be wondering why, just like I was. So I reached out to Ride1UP and I said, hey, what's the deal? I got quite a few more miles than you guys are estimating, and that's not always normal. And they gave me an answer I was really happy with. They said, oftentimes we see brands saying over-promising and under-delivering, especially in the range department, and we wanted to do the opposite. So instead, they decided to be really conservative on their range estimations. That way, they didn't leave customers feeling frustrated if they couldn't reach those numbers. So that explains, in my opinion, why I got so high, and ultimately probably leads to happier customers down the road that don't feel shortchanged when the bike they bought under a certain advertised range estimation didn't fully pan out. And I think that was a good move. Now to put this battery back, you're simply going to reverse the process. I'll put the bottom in first with these clips, and then it will latch into place. So I get the bottom in, I go up top, I depress that latch, and it locks right back in place. So in terms of the components, let's take a look at what we have here. Starting in the back, we've got a Shimano 8-speed drivetrain, and that is made with a Shimano Acera rear derailleur, and that's mated to an 11-34 rear cassette and a 42-tooth chain ring up front with a single-sided chain guard on the right side here. Now your cranks are alloy 170mm cranks with plastic flat pedals that do have some reflectors and traction studs for the bottom of your shoes to just maintain that traction while you're riding. Now in terms of braking, we have Star Union hydraulic disc brakes that have 2 piston calipers, but really beefed up rotors. So we've got 180mm up front and a 203mm rotor in the rear, and both front and rear rotors have a thickness of 2.3mm. Now that may not seem significant, but the majority of e-bikes we see have rotor thickness of 1.8mm. And that extra rotor thickness is going to help with heat dissipation and ultimately longer longevity of the rotors in the braking system, because you have less heat heating all the components as the rotors are spinning through those brake pads and calipers. Now I will say one small issue I had with this one, my front rotor did come from the brand from Ride1UP with a slight warp in it. It wasn't bad, and I was able to get it centered enough to roll without making any noise, but I did notice on some sharper corners, maybe under some little bit of flexing or lateral force, there was a little bit of rotor rub I could hear, and ultimately I just had to take it back to the shop, put it back on the stand, and try to get that rotor perfectly centered. But when you have a thicker 2.5 rotor, you're going to have less room to work with to center it between the pads. Just something to be aware of, and it may have just been a one-off that I had that warped rotor. Just something to be checking out when you get your bike. So when it comes to the saddle up here, we have this Velo saddle. It's nice and plush and cushy, not super wide and also not super narrow, good for everyday riding. Now up front, we've got a 100mm travel suspension fork with a coil spring. The top right stanchion has a lockout, the left right has a preload, and it's got through axle support down below. Right now it's currently locked out, but you just flip this switch back up and you can see you get your 100mm of travel. Now, when it comes to the cockpit here, we have a kind of Dutch style cruiser bar or Dutch city bar. It's got that 15-degree sweep backwards and a 35mm degree rise. And ultimately that just makes things more comfortable, closer to your body and more upright rather than down, forward, and stretched out and aggressive. Now here in the center, we've got an adjustable stem that lets you adjust this up to 90 degrees. So really flat out front or all the way up top. You can just dial that in and get it to where you're most comfortable and what you like when you're riding your bike. Now this is 680mm wide from end to end, and it is an alloy bar with a 31.8mm bite for your stem clamp. On both ends, we have Star Union brake levers. On the right side, we have our Shimano 8-speed trigger shifters with a window to see what gear you're in. And on the left side, we have a push throttle. Now, right here in the center, or not the center, but this left side, we have the new display from Ride1UP. This display is a big leap forward for Ride1UP. It's got all the languages and menus in just a very easy to use format, rather than the old school ways where they had odd codes and menus you had to look up and figure out how to navigate. Everything here is just simple and to the point, and tons of customization. So let's just deep dive into this display and we'll see what all you can do. All right, so this is the new Ride1UP display, and it's their model called the DM07. You've got 2 up and down buttons right here. You've got a power button up top and a menu or mode button down below. So we'll start with what's just on the home screen here. Up in the top left, we've got the time. Right next to that, you might not be able to see it, but there's a headlight indicator, and if I hold that plus sign, the screen gets dimmer and the headlight turns on. If I hold it again, it'll turn off and the screen brightens back up. I think it's assuming that it's just darker outside when you use the headlight. Now, in the middle, we've got the mode that it's on. It's currently in Tour, but you have Eco, Tour, Sport, and Turbo and Boost. So 5 total levels of pedal assist. Right next to that little circle is the AirTag indicator. So if you have an Apple phone, you can just simply pull out your phone and pair this to the AirTag within the bike, which is a nice security feature, allowing you to know where the bike is at all times. Next to that, you've got two battery levels remaining. One is in a numerical percentage and the other is in a battery bar visual indicator. Now, the second row up top, on the left side, that T stands for torque because it's currently in torque sensor mode. And when we change to cadence sensor mode in just a couple minutes here, you'll see that change to a C. You have 2 real-time indicators on the left and right of the speedometer, and that's going to be showing you the wattage output and the power you're using real time. That's where I saw that 1428 peaking watts. It showed it right here visually through the graph, but also right here in the number where it says 0 watts. Because it's dynamic, that only goes up while you're physically riding the bike and using motor power. Now in the center, you have the speedometer that can of course be in either miles per hour or kilometers per hour. Down below that, you've got the class setting. It can be class 1, 2, or 3, or off-road, like I mentioned earlier, completely unrestricted. And we'll show you how to change that in just a second as well. Now there is another data screen, actually 2 more data screens you can look at on here. One, you just tap the button and it takes you to the next data screen showing you there's trip meters, odometers, average speed, and max speed on the bike. Hitting it again will take you through how often each of the levels are used. Now to hit it again will take you back to the home screen. Now to get into the advanced settings, there's a lot of things you can do in here as well. So we talked about motor programming, things like that. This is where that happens. So you'll hold the menu button on the bottom, that will take you to the settings menu. Now, first things first, you have your obvious units, kilometers per hour or miles per hour. You can make the change here. Here you can adjust the time on the bike. Here you can adjust the backlight setting, so how bright this display is. The next one is auto sleep. You can set how long it takes the bike to power off once you stop using it, or you can not use that at all, but this is where you would adjust that. Here you can set a password for the bike, which is another layer of added security over the AirTag. Right here, this is where the motor tuning starts. So this is called torque ratio, and we'll go in here and look at this. What this does, it allows you to take each level of pedal assist and assign a percentage between 0 and 100 of torque ratio. So in effect, right now in Eco or PAS1, we have 20% of the max torque. In PAS2, we have 40%, and so on. Let me get back to it. So basically, I've got it in steps right now, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100% torque, increasingly stronger through the PAS levels, but you can change each one to be literally any one of those numbers along 0 to 100. So right now it's in 20%, but I could bump that all the way up to, I could go as high as 100% if I wanted to. You could really go as high or as low as you want, and you can kind of see that bar going up and down as we go. And then once you've got one you like, you hit the mode button again, and then you can go down through each one and just pick the one you want. You could even put all at 100 or all at 10. It's really up to you. And that allows you, in conjunction with the next screen, to just tune how the bike feels to you. You can make it super mild and reserved, or you can make it very punchy and aggressive. It's really just your call, which is I really like about that feature. Now it keeps backing out, so I'm just gonna hold it one more time to get in there. So here, the next one is the amp output. This is also going to work in conjunction with the torque ratio. This is going to be measuring how much amperage is going to be sent out when you're riding. And just like the last screen, you go in per PAS level, Eco, Tour, Sport, Turbo, and Boost, and you can change them. Now, this is currently set to whatever it came with, but you can play with these numbers and mix them and match them up and down and just see what works for you. So we'll back out of here. All right, the next screen is going to be the riding mode. This is where you can pick between class 1, class 2, or class 3, which is the standard 28-mile-an-hour pedal assist. But if you wanted to go beyond that and just take the restrictions off the bike altogether, you can go down here to off-road mode, and that will put this in off-road mode. Of course, I must say, do things like checking your local laws. But with that said, you can go ride this unrestricted and just see what it can really do, which is a really neat feature on the bike as well. So we'll back out of that and go down to the next one, which is e-bike info. Hitting this will give us things like information about the display, soft serial number, firmware, hardware, things you can relay to support if you have an issue that will help them know what you're working with. We'll get out of this one. Go to battery info. This will tell you about the battery, including the serial number, the firmware version, the voltage, its current temperature, and remaining capacity. We'll back out of this and go to controller info. It's going to be similar, serial number, firmware version, and hardware version. So we'll back out of this one and back out of e-bike info. And that will take us to advanced settings. So hitting that will give us 3 advanced settings that drastically change how the bike feels. One is wheel circumference. This I would only ever change if I literally changed the wheel circumference. If I got a different sized wheel, I wouldn't recommend you doing that because that's going to affect how the bike rides, affect if it fits the fork or the rear triangle, but nonetheless, that's where you would handle that. So we'll go back into there, advanced settings. So next is going to be speed limit. Here, it will tell you the max speed limit for the current class you're in. Because we're in class 3, it's currently set to 28. But if we were to go to class 2, that would change to 20. Now here is where you can change between torque sensor or cadence sensor, selecting sensor mode, and then you simply just pick between torque and cadence. Right now it's on torque. I will change it to cadence, and when we back out, you'll see the C on the screen giving you that visual indicator of what sensor we're using. So we'll click that, and then we will back out. And then we will back out of advanced settings. Here you can reset the display and all the data. And that is the last option in here. So when we back out, we'll just simply go up to settings and we're back to the home screen. You'll notice here on the upper left corner, it now has a C showing us that we are using the cadence sensor. So I asked Ride1UP about if there was going to be an app for this, and Ride1UP said they've opted to not use apps on their bikes, and for good reason, that being they don't want the overhead of having a whole team of IT people that are going to be dealing with new bikes and versions and softwares. It becomes a lot of money that ultimately gets passed down to consumers, which is why I think at that $15.95 price point, there's a lot of value in this bike because they don't have the overhead of the app connectivity, but they gave you a display that kind of acts as an app. It's big enough to let you visually see everything, and even custom motor tune and apply your Apple AirTag. All those things usually occur in a bike's app. So having all that in the display ultimately just pass some savings on to you. So that wraps up the display. Let's go out on a ride and see how the Vorsa handles on the road. All right, guys, we're out here on the Ride1UP Vorsa. Now, when you get on this, the riding position is pretty much upright. So this bar is a little bit Dutch style, so it kind of sweeps back, bringing my reach closer, my body more upright, because I don't have to lean as far forward to have a good fit on here. I think it's going to be a solid rider position for most day-to-day lifestyle, recreational, you know, your average person who wants to get on a bike and be comfortable and ride. Not super aggressive, just comfortable and smooth. And speaking of smooth, the frame, this new frame, you notice there's some higher frame material at the lowest point. And that's because they added a gusset there to kind of strengthen up. The point on step 3 frames of flex is generally because there's just not enough material connecting the front portion to the rear portion. And so it creates like a flex point, a wobble point. Well, they beefed that area up and it feels nice and responsive, nice and stiff. Really good feeling step through frame. And that's a big goal for any bike manufacturers to pull that off, and they did it well here. Another thing is the comfort. So you got a nice wide saddle, ergo platform grips, 110 millimeters of suspension up front, and then the 2.6-inch tires by Schwalbe. These all team up for just a really comfortable ride. And the Schwalbes, I'm a big fan of Schwalbe tires in general. And these tires, although they have like an all-terrain tread pattern, it's almost like a wide XC tire or cross-country tire where you have knobs, you have all-terrain tread patterns. Hi. But what you have as well is low rolling resistance. These are really quiet and really smooth on the road, and they don't feel like an all-terrain or a knobby MTB tire, despite looking like it and pretty much having that capability. So I think the tire choice was really solid on here as well. Now this motor is 750 watts and it runs on both a torque sensor or a cadence sensor, and you can select either in the display. And I'll show you how we do that, of course. But let's see how the power is. I'll put it into boost mode, so the highest of the PAS levels, and we'll hold it on a short little 9% grade we have up ahead. See if we lose any of our steam as we go forward up that hill. But then we'll also kind of circle around up the corner and go up a longer hill that's got like a 5 to 7% grade. It's a little bit more sustained. And that one's about a quarter mile long, and that will give us a better idea of how this bike is either able to hold speed, maybe accelerate up the hill, or maybe lose speed up the hill. We'll kind of get a good idea of how it handles that. So 750 watts nominally rated. I know it peaks at somewhere around 1400 watts because I can see it on the display, although they don't list it. And it still puts out 95 newton meters of torque. So plenty of power, at least on paper. But let's see how that translates into some real world usage. We're not quite to that hill yet, so I'm going to use this time to talk about these brakes. So we've got Star Union hydraulic disc brakes. They are 2-piston caliper, and they did beef them up a little bit. So we've got thicker rotors at 2.3 millimeters, which helps with heat dissipation and overall just longevity of the pads and the rotors themselves, and better braking power because of that reduced heating. And then they went with a 180 millimeter up front and a 203 millimeter in the rear. So if you got your kid on the cargo rack or some gear, and that area is just beefed up with extra capabilities, or excuse me, extra payload, it's a great time to beef up that braking area. And it looks like that's what they did. Well, we'll hold off because we are at that first little punchy hill. So I'm just going to throttle it, hold it at 20 miles an hour. And so 19.8 going up to the hill. Small drop there to 17.5 was the lowest I saw it go. So about 2 mile an hour loss on a 9% grade on your left. But now we'll go left up into this neighborhood into the sustained climb. Like I said, 5 to 7%, about a quarter mile long will give us a better kind of idea. So 2% loss on, a 2 mile an hour loss on a 9% grade. And let's see what we can do with this shorter one here, or excuse me, longer one here. Little stop sign. All right, so just gonna throttle it, and we are at 18 miles an hour, and looks like we're able to climb, so we're going up to almost 19 miles an hour, but we're not dropping speed. Yeah, now we're at almost 20 miles an hour, 20.7. And that's gonna be the max for the throttle. Oh, I'm gonna have to slow down for this gentleman who's not looking. But we're still able to accelerate up this hill. We're now back up to 18, 19, still accelerating up. So that's really solid right there. We're not losing any speed. We're actually accelerating uphill, which is always good. So we're 19.3, 19.4, 19.6, 19.8, 20, 20.4. We're still climbing and still accelerating. So all that's a really good sign. So 20.1, looks like we dropped less than half a mile an hour the whole time going up that climb. So really strong numbers on hill climbing, which I think is where this bike is going to do kind of a really solid job. And just having the ability to give you that power you need, whether you got extra cargo with you and you're testing out that payload, your kids, or you're just, off a campsite and you want some power to go explore the fire roads and just have a little fun. It's gonna have power for both of those things. Now let's talk those brakes. So the brakes, Star Union 2-piston calipers. Like I said, 180 up front, 203 in the rear. So we got some beefed up braking, and then both rotors. The standard is usually 1.8 millimeters thick, but these are 2.3 millimeters thick. So they really beefed up braking, which I think is going to complement this bike with its higher payload and the ability to carry extra cargo. But we're at about 23 miles an hour. Let's just do a quick stop. 3, 2, 1. So no locking it up, and I was able to stop there at, I don't know, 15 feet, pretty quick. I've not had any issues with the brakes. They feel really good. There's actually a little bit more modulation than I expected. So that ability to kind of finesse the braking instead of just getting full-on braking power or none. You've got kind of a good window to finesse how much braking you're applying, which is a nice feature. When I get on the trail here, we will Let's see how this does in getting up to 28 miles an hour. So we'll start from a dead stop using throttle. Get on the flat part here. So I'm in boost mode. I got 92% battery, so it should be pretty close to its peak performance here. So we'll just do a dead start using throttle to 20, and then from 20, I'll use the pedal assistance to 28. So 3, 2, 1. I do like how the start is reserved. It doesn't just jolt you off, but it's quickly, I mean, we're already 15 miles an hour, but you don't get launched like chirping tires off the gate, which is kind of a nice feeling, especially if you're someone who doesn't want to deal with a super powerful bike. But 20 miles an hour, there we are. So now I'll just start pedaling, and you can see we're quickly on your left. I didn't want to go by her really fast, so I'm going to do that again. But all right, we're back at 20 miles an hour, and 3, 2, 1, 22, 25, 28. I mean, that was fast. So the power on this is solid. I mean, it's really good power. So as far as motor noise, so this is an AKM rear hub motor. On your left. Thank you. It's an AKM rear hub motor with a torque and cadence sensor. And so like on Ride1UP's 500 watt models, like the Roadster V3, that's got a Mevice motor, which is virtually silent. But that's hard, very hard to do at the 750 watt motor. And so this one's got a little bit of road noise, or excuse me, a little bit of motor noise, but it's definitely on the lower end of what we see these days. And the power delivery from the torque sensor is really good from Ride1UP's Intuidrive system. All in all, I think with the off-road capability, the not quite fat tires at 4-inch, but super capable at 2.6 inches with the suspension fork, the step-through frame, the extended cargo rack, it's just gonna be really good at whatever little jobs you have for it. Kind of a jack of all trades type of bike, or an SUV style bike, if they like to say. On your left. But they've also got a ton of tweaking the display, like I showed you, where you can just kind of play with every part of the motor, the torque ratios, the PAS settings. Just really kind of easy to use, has all the customization you're gonna want for most situations. AirTag connectivity. I mean, really, whether you're commuting in a town where you want those AirTags, or you're just taking it out on the weekends to go explore in a place like this, I mean, the bike can handle a little bit of everything. So all in all, I think this new release was a really solid way for Ride1UP to consolidate some of their other bikes, like the Limited, 700, Tourist. They all felt fairly similar to me, even though they were different. And I think this is a good way to kind of streamline some of those other models into one model that looks the part of all of them and kind of does the part of all of them, but just into one consolidated frame. All right, let's go back and look at this from a mechanic standpoint and a build perspective, and then we'll wrap this review up. All right, guys, so let's talk about the bike from a build perspective or a mechanic's perspective. Things you're gonna come across that are going to either add to or take away from the longevity of the bike, or things that are gonna add to or take away from just the overall maintenance experience on the bike. So a couple things I'm gonna start with on here, but before I do, I wanna say thank you to Feedback Sports. They provided us with their Pro HD aluminum racks and some of their toolkits. Look, I've got my own personal rack at home, but it was a $50 one I bought on Amazon. It tips all over the place. It's not very sturdy. If you want a good solid rack and you want to buy once and just have a good one time, this would definitely be the one to check out. It holds these heavy e-bikes without any issues at all. I'll put a link down in the description. So with that said, let me just kick it off with some things that I do like. One is, so previously with Ride1UP, they had welded rear racks to bike frames. Now, on one hand, that makes it stronger, but on the other hand, that becomes a permanent rack for whoever owns the bike, and not everyone wants to use it. What they did this time around is they took a two-piece rack system. It's 100% bolted on, not welded on this time, and it allows you to have it three ways. Really, you can have no rack at all. You could just unbolt this and pull both of these right off, or you could have just the one rack that basically ends here forward, so this area, or you can add the whole thing, and then you've got 331 pounds max payload in the rear cargo area. So they kind of just let it be completely up to you whether you want to have an entire rack system, almost like a light cargo bike, or whether you want a just minimalistic rack that's right in place, or no rack at all. Good, smart idea with the modular rack system. So the next thing that I liked on here, from a build perspective and a design perspective was this beefed up gusset right here at the step through. So generally when brands make a step through frame, one of the bigger challenges is creating a frame that doesn't have a ton of material down here, but also still rides stiff and responsive. You don't want a frame that has too much flex in it. And if there's not enough reinforcement in step through frames, you will get flex that you can feel when you're riding, especially at higher speeds. This time around, they did add, you can see, like physically see it here, it's just a little bit more metal space here. The brand, when we spoke to them on the phone about this bike, they didn't seem to, they weren't too into the look of this, they said, but they wanted to have a bike that had a nice solid feel when you ride it on a step through frame. And that's exactly what they ended up with here. So I say, despite maybe their opinions on the looks, I'd much rather have just the stiffer, more responsive frame overall. So finally up front, another thing I like on here is they went with a through axle on this front suspension fork. A through axle is going to be a better contact point, more secure, and just a really good solid mating between that front tire and the bike itself. It's just going to be a better thing than like a quick release, which has a really tiny rod going through the center of it. All right, so for some things that I would change on this or just keep in mind from an ownership and a build perspective, one thing is this derailleur area back here. So two things going on with it. One is I like the fact that they have a bash guard in place, but here's the deal. Bash guards are good for bikes that are getting hit a lot. They're crashing into rocks, they're falling on things. If you drop your bike once and the chances that you bend the derailleur hanger pretty low, and that's really what this does, is it protects the derailleur from getting hit if you were to drop the bike and ultimately bending that derailleur hanger, it's screwing up your alignment and your rear end. I really think this is something you guys could just pull right off. It's not really that necessary unless you see you're living in a position or you're riding in a way that's just gonna really beat the bike up. And in that case, you're probably gonna need a whole guard for the bike. But most of us out here in Southern Utah mountain bike pretty regularly and pretty aggressively, and none of us have bash guards on bikes. Not saying that mountain biking is the end all be all for why you'd put this on there, but if you're not doing it at the really rough level of riding, I just don't see a need for it on city streets and just practical light use riding bikes. All right, another thing was the braking system. I know that's gonna be a point of just, it's positive and negative. So it's positive in the way that they went with a 2.3 millimeter thick rotor, 180 in the front, 203 in the rear, both 2.3 millimeters thick. Now on one end, that's a really good beefed up braking system. You want a larger rotor, you want a thicker rotor, it's gonna help with heat dissipation, it's gonna help with longevity of the pads and the rotor itself. With that said, the Star Union calipers we have, there's very little space when you're lining up your caliper and pads onto the rotor. So when you assemble this bike yourself, both tires, when I put this together, had rotor rub as I would ride the bike. And what that means is I have to go into here and I have to kind of get a good look at the pads and the rotor and make sure there's, light on both sides. But when you have a thicker rotor material in between, you lose all that extra space you would have with, say, a more traditional 1.8 millimeter thickness. So on this bike with this brand Star Union calipers, the braking is really, really good. You just have very little room to correct for rotor rub. And I'd say a 1.8 millimeter thick would either do fine on this light of a bike. It's only a 70-ish pound bike. And keep the 180 to 203, but maybe at a 1.8 millimeter. I just feel like 2.3 millimeters, while the braking is beefed up and better, it just has very little room for error when you get rotor rub. And while right now, you probably heard it on the ride we just took, when I'm going straight, it sounds fine. When I hit turns, I do hear a little bit of rub, which leads me to believe there might be some front end flex, or just no room for error at all with any kind of lateral flex. Just something for them to keep in mind on their next build. All right, finally on the rear derailleur as well, this is the Shimano Acera. It's not the bottom tier like a Tourney or an Altus, but Acera is just not going to be, it's not going to offer a lot of chain retention. This is something that as you're riding a bike designed to go off-road, it's got an off-road mode, it's got a front suspension fork, it's got Schwalbe like knobby tires. This bike is built to handle some light off-roading. And when you do, you're just going to have a lot of chain slap as you're hitting those bumps. And while that's not too big of a deal, they did beef it up with a nice like chain guard here on the chain stay. I'd just rather see go with something that's economic but still good with a good clutch on it, maybe like a Microshift Advent series derailleur. That's gonna just keep this a little bit more snug, something like they already have on their Roadster V3 would be a really good addition to this bike. This derailleur works fine, no issues with it, just something to keep in mind when you go off-road, you will have that kind of drivetrain chatter coming from the back end. And so from a build perspective and just a mechanics perspective, that's kind of a rundown of things that we saw that we really liked this time around and some things that we'd like to see tweaked for improvement on future releases. But all in all, really well done on the Vorsa. All right, guys, so there you have it, the new Ride1UP Vorsa. I'll save you the cheesy puns of versatility references, but this bike really is versatile. It covers a lot of bases for a lot of folks. With the modular rack system included, you can extend this out and carry up to 331 pounds on the back. You've got Apple AirTags built into it for security. You've got programmable motors tuning. You've got torque sensor versus cadence sensor. You can pick between the two, and you've got the off-road abilities to go and do what you want on the weekends. It's really going to be a strong contender for a one bike that serves a lot of purposes. Now, if you have any questions about the Vorsa that I did not answer, just drop them down below. I will research and find out, reach out to the brand if I have to, and get you those answers you need. And until the next review comes out, consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you guys out on the trail.